Brought to you from Melbourne, Australia, this is the Badminton Podcast, a community for badminton players by badminton players, where we talk badminton, celebrate local heroes, interview players from all walks of life, and push you to grow as a player and a person. Introducing your hosts, Jeff and Henry.
Hello, badminton community. Welcome to another episode of the Badminton Podcast. We're the co-founders of Volant. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Henry.
And we're here because we've got another episode for you. And we're going to talk about something that's very practical today that you can use in your badminton life and in your general life as well, because it's something that I think not many people know about. So, Henry, I'll leave it up to you as for the introduction.
Thank you, Jeff. So, today we have Jasmine, who is a podiatrist from Kilsyth, Melbourne, Australia. She specialises in chronic injury care, looking after elderly, and has a strong passion for enabling badminton players to play at their best. She is attempting to be the Dr. Pimple Popper of the podiatry world, with some pretty gruesome photos on her Instagram. P.S. No, she does not have a foot fetish. Welcome to the podcast, Jasmine.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on here.
So I'm not too sure about that. I think secretly, so I'm a dentist by trade. Mm-hmm. I don't have a tooth fetish. I've never actually heard that.
You sure?
Tooth fetish.
You're sure?
But yeah, no, I don't. I absolutely don't. But I find it quite intriguing, and I tend to see myself looking at people's teeth. So are you sure you don't have a foot fetish?
Oh, it's so funny because when I first started podiatry, everyone was like, why do you want to look at feet all day? That's such a disgusting area of your body. And it's actually really funny. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a dentist myself, but then really? I ended up on the other end of the body. Yeah, exactly. But one of my friends put it like this. It's like, why would you go into a field that you see the worst of that body part every single day? So technically, I don't know, you wouldn't get that sort of a fetish for it. But I like watching people walk and the way that their feet work during activity. So, you know, I find myself often just at the shops and watching that person walk in front of me, and I'm just there judging the way that they're walking.
Yeah.
So, quite frequently, which is a little bit stalkerish, but I think it's just now drilled in as part of my nature. So
I find the same thing where I'm talking to someone, but I just automatically look at their teeth and I notice things about their teeth right away that a lot of people find quite creepy. So
No, I'm exactly the same as well. Whenever I see people walking their dogs, I'm a vet by trade, but when I see people walking their dogs along the street, I'm like, oh, which leg is that dog lame on? So what problems does that dog have? So, I feel exactly the same way. And I think it's just something that's drilled into us as, what do you call it?
Health professionals.
Yeah, health professionals.
yes. Yeah, definitely.
So, Jasmine, we're going to jump into the podiatry stuff because I think some people might not actually know what it's about and what you actually do. But before we get into that, let's talk badminton, because remembering that this is the Badminton Podcast and we're here because we love badminton. We want to share the sport with everyone we know. And not only within the sport itself, we want to help people develop outside their sport in their careers, in their lives as well. So from a badminton perspective, how often do you play? Where do you play? What do you do with badminton?
So currently I only play once a week. I play at the Kilsyth Stadium. So that's the Mountain District Badminton Centre. I've played since I was quite young, though I was only always a casual player. So I only ever started playing with my parents when we were younger. They took me to Springer's Leisure Centre. We'd have a bag of salt and vinegar chips. I loved sitting in the umpire's chair, like that sort of thing. And it was really funny because my parents put me through a lot of different sports during my childhood, ranging from golf to swimming to tennis and all of that, but nothing seemed to stick. And it was really interesting that badminton was the only sport that I kept falling back to. And it was the sport that I actually never trained in. So as I grew up, I did inter-school sports in badminton. But other than that, I never played it outside in more of a competitive environment or anything. And it actually wasn't until in my final year of university that I had come back from my semester 1 placement over in Singapore that I came back and I was like, oh, life seems a little bit dull at the moment. I need to do something different with my life. And I just thought, oh, well, I've never actually played badminton socially in it, like as in just me turning up to a social. So I just Googled one online and then that was that. That was me at 21 years of age and I haven't stopped since.
Cool. And what do you find kept bringing you back to the sport? Because you said you tried golf, tennis, swimming. Is there a reason you chose badminton out of all of those when you were 21, you decided, hey, I'm going to do something different?
I don't know. I find that it is the joy of being with people and being able to be so social with people in that environment. Like I find that when you're sitting down waiting for the court to come open, you can have a really good chat. You can, say hi to people and you really get to know your regulars. Whereas I don't know why, but I always found that the technicality of the sport as well just drew me back. Like being able to do a net or a smash it just gives you so much satisfaction. And the fact that it can be a team sport, it just makes it just more fun and there's that camaraderie with it as well.
Yeah, just the way that you're talking about it now, I'm just thinking about, playing net shots, drop shots, smashing, and it just feels really good when you're talking about it as well. And when we actually had a podcast with one of our good friends last week and we talked about how badminton is a bit of an addiction. And it's funny how you said your parents gave you're having salt and vinegar chips because for him it was McDonald's after badminton. So I think there's always some kind of reward that we're sort of, it's in the back of our minds that we don't know about. But I mean, for me, when I think of the sport, just like you, it's just that pleasure of playing. And yeah, really glad that you're playing so much.
Well, I'm only playing that once a week at the moment. I was playing a lot more before, but ever since I started my own business, and I do still work at 2 other places as well. So I am just too flat chat to be able to play more, unfortunately. But I do play when I can as well. So just aside from that general once a week social, if I can slip it in with some friends on the weekend, I'll try to put it in somewhere.
Yeah, that's great. I think that life gets busy, especially with being a business owner and working multiple jobs. It's really important that you do take the time to do the things that you love. And I think Henry and I really resonate with that because we have changed our careers based on what we really love to do. And that's why we're doing this. And we have Volant wear because we do love badminton and it is a great, not just a hobby, but it's a lifestyle for us. Yeah.
Oh, it's great that you can incorporate that together.
So Jasmine, before this actual podcast recording, we've been in communication and you've also said that quite a few people from badminton have asked you for help. So with their feet, their ankles and things within your profession. Now, someone listening might be thinking, what does a podiatrist actually do to help badminton players and the elderly and all the clients that you see? So could you give us a bit of a rundown as to what podiatry is and what you actually do for your clients?
So a podiatrist is a branch of allied health that we specialize in the lower limb. So what people actually don't know is that we start from anything from the hip downwards. But with our theoretical approach, we actually come from looking at your feet, how your feet move, and then using it as the basis of how that affects the rest of you in, why you would have had this sort of injury, for example, why this tendon or whatnot can be overstressed in some way or another, and just the mechanical loading. How does it affect your knees? How does it affect your hips and your lower back as well? That's how we tend to look at it. What we do is actually a lot more broader than what a lot of people also know of. We do a lot of our sporting related work. So in terms of your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, and so on and so forth. I do a lot of your manual therapy. So very similar to how a physio and all of the other allied health branches work, I still do massage every now and again. I can do dry needling and cupping to help release all the muscle tension and whatnot as well. But the one thing that we can do in this department is that we're allowed to inject, whereas like physios and whatnot aren't qualified to inject like anesthetics and whatnot. So I'm qualified in prolotherapy as well, which is a glucose-based injection that helps with ligament repair and collagen reformation. So that's one part of what we do. So just to be able to determine these causal factors of your injury and then figure out from there what to do with it. The other three categories that I like to put it into is that we also do a lot in terms of skin and nail care, which is calluses, corns, fungal nails and skin, warts, ingrown toenails, and anything to do with dermatology. I do have a lot of the people who are elderly that I look after just cutting their toenails, because it is something that they do find difficulty in, just bending over and reaching over to cut their toenails. And that's where, when I work in my nursing home job, that's where I do a lot of that. The other thing that we also do is we also assess from children as young as walking age or even younger. So we take a look at how their feet can develop and how they grow up, because they can have multiple issues with their gait just due to either genetics or just simply in the way that they were sitting in their utero in mum's belly. Mm-hmm. And so we can just see how that progresses as well, and how we can help the parent and the child let them grow up with better development. And the fourth one is we do a lot of diabetes foot checkups as well, because not many people know that diabetes actually affects your feet a lot. And that's just because our feet are so far away from our heart and our nervous system. It affects the small nerves and the arteries, and therefore we have to check them and then make sure that everything is still working and functioning really well. And we liaise back with the GPs with this to make sure that they are up to date and everything's all prevented in case we do pick up something nasty.
Yeah, cool. I certainly didn't know a lot of that and didn't realise that podiatry covered such a broad range of things and health issues. Wow. In terms of, I think there was a bit scientific there a couple of times. So I wanted to just help the audience understand just a couple of things. You were talking about collagenation, was it?
Reformation of collagen. Sorry.
Yeah, reformation of collagen for the ligaments. So would you be able to just briefly explain that to the audience, as well as the term gait? Now, for the less scientific minded, just those couple of terms they might not be aware of.
Yeah. So gait is essentially what we describe as the way that you walk. And with what I was describing about with prolotherapy is a glucose-based injection. But we can add saline or lignocaine, like a type of anesthetic in it to numb the area to help with collagen reformation, which is essentially helping the collagen rebuild itself in the area, as well as the ligament repair.
So Jasmine, that introduction to podiatry was really insightful, because I've had basically podiatry care for many, many years now. And one of my good friends, Joel Finlay, who used to be my doubles partner, is also a podiatrist. So I know what he does at work and all the things involved. My brother's also a chiropractor, which is also another allied health professional. And he always talks about the relationship between the whole body and how everything works as one rather than separate entities. And I feel that a lot of people will think, hey, podiatrists just deal with feet and it's just feet, and I only go to them if there's something wrong with my feet in itself. But how would you say the feet actually affect the whole body in its entirety?
Everything in our body is really connected, which I think is so cool and so fascinating. So with how our feet work, if you have the ability to stand up right now, I recommend you should. What you can try actually is just to roll your ankles inwards, and you will almost feel your knees fall inwards and then your hips kind of twist inwards as well. And generally what might happen as well is that your bum will stick out and then your lower back will dip. So that in itself is a really quick experiment for you to be able to tell that so much of one little part of your body can affect and pull all the way up through the chain. This is why when we do podiatry, everyone says, oh yes, you can only be, if you've got a foot problem, you go to a podiatrist only. But it's really important to know that because everything is so connected, if your hips are sore, if your glutes are sore, could it be coming from your back or is it coming from lower down at your feet? So I like to approach it from both ways and both ends. That's why I work with the physio and work with the other allied health to ensure that the patient is getting treated from both ends. So we're making sure that we eliminate any possibilities of other things affecting that area that they're coming in with, that they're complaining about.
Yeah, that's really cool. How I was sitting, but I tried to do that roll your ankle thing, and it certainly seems that all other parts of my upper limb were starting to engage with each other. And so, quick question: how do I decide whether to come see you if I do have any issues with that lower limb? So I'm thinking, because when just the general public are thinking, they go, okay, if there's something wrong with my feet, I'll go see a podiatrist. But from what you're saying and what we understand about it is that it's affecting more of your body. So for the everyday person, how do I decide that, I need to go see a podiatrist for this issue, even though it might be, say, a hip issue or a knee issue? Is that via referral from, say, the physio? Because you said you work very closely with them as well.
We don't necessarily need a referral. A lot of people just come off the street to see me. However, I do find that the best trigger for people to come see us is if you feel like the issue is coming from either the way that you're walking, or you would just like to make sure and check out that is not something that's actually affecting that area. So yeah, it's just as a full assessment in itself. It could be just something that you tick off the list and you say, okay, well, if it's not the way that I'm walking or the way that I'm moving during activity that's affecting this area, then at least we can localize it a little bit more.
And I think potentially an idea would be that if someone's out there that has a recurring injury, so let's just say they have a lower back issue or a hip issue, and they're consistently getting massages or going to see the physio, and it gets a bit better, but then it relapses all the time, potentially looking elsewhere to see whether there could be an origin or a cause or a significant factor that's coming from the feet or something related to podiatry, because we might be missing something and we're just treating the symptom and not really dealing with the cause. Do you see that often?
Yeah, exactly. I get quite a few people who do come in and they've come in for one thing and then we've just found something completely different in terms of the way that their legs either are or the way that they move. And we've just gone, okay, well, you may be getting that pain, but your leg also rotates in this way when you're walking, and that's why this part is also sore. So it all it's like figuring out pieces of puzzles that all come together, which is why I love what I do, because it's so cool to see that all come together during the consultation, and then also to have the patient go, oh, that makes so much sense,
Yeah, completely resonate with that. In dentistry in itself, it is just pieces of the puzzle. And I always remind all of my clients that one test only tests one thing, but it's one piece of the puzzle that you have to add up together to see whether they all line up. And sometimes not everything lines up perfectly, and then you're stuck trying to make a diagnosis without having things line up perfectly. So I really resonate that it is a piece of the puzzle, and we need to try to see as many pieces as possible in order for us to get the bigger picture correct. So
yeah, that's right.
So in terms of how you're helping, say, athletes and other badminton players who ask for your advice, what would you say are the most common things that people ask you about, or they come in for consultations about, or they've injured, especially related to badminton, just so that the audience, who most of them will be badminton players or associated with badminton in some way, shape or form, just so that they know, okay, these are the most common things and this is how I can prevent them?
So The three most common things I see from badminton players specifically are, number one, your ankle sprains, because, moving laterally on a court, so from side to side, you're trying to pick up the shuttle from one side of the court, the left side of the court to the right side of the court. You can just roll over very easily, especially if your ankles are quite, there's a lot of laxity to them, so they're very flexible. Achilles and heel pain is also quite a common one, especially running front to back court, and also when you're landing from a jump. So some people can get that shock quite heavily on through their heels, especially if they're not wearing the right footwear as well. And the last thing is knee pain. Knee pain predominantly caused by foot posture when they're playing badminton. I do sit there at the bench sometimes watching people just playing on the court, and the way that their foot lands as they're changing direction, or the way that they stop themselves to be able to recenter. It's very interesting to see how their foot maybe falls in and then their knee caves in with it. And then, all the way that they twist in order to be able to turn can also twist their knee if they're not doing it right. So, these are the three main things that I do see from badminton players. Yeah,
I don't disagree with that. I'm sorry, I'm not surprised with that at all, because I've had my fair share of all those things plus additional things. I wanted to ask you though, I had a lot of problems with ankle jarring. So not really rolling or spraining, but jarring when I was lunging. Is that a common thing as well?
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's just from the way that you lunge. If you do if your foot rolls outwards just a little bit, but not enough to perhaps roll it, it can jar it just enough. Or if the way that you land is a little bit more on the outside of your foot rather than more stable and balanced through your foot, you can get that shock through that outside part of your ankle and then up through your leg as well.
Is that the feeling that you're feeling, Jeff?
It's been a long time since I felt it, to be honest. And footwear was a big one for me as well. That helped a lot.
So Jasmine, you talked about three key injuries. So the ankle, the Achilles, and the knee. And I can just imagine you sitting on the court side, just analysing every single badminton player in the gym. But what I wanted to do was, hopefully, if you don't mind, if we could go through each of these key ones and just talk about, I guess, first things first, how to prevent these injuries, because prevention is better than cure, as we always know. And then, I guess, how to treat them immediately after injury and best ways to rehabilitate. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course. So we'll start off with ankle sprains, which is going to be your most common one. As I've said, it's mostly due to poor footwork and such. So the best ways to prevent it is to ensure that you do make sure that you warm up properly, especially through your ankles. So doing some general ankle mobility exercises before you start playing is really key. So even if you're just off court, you can just roll your ankles, make circles with them. That's a very simple thing to do. Pushing your foot forward and then bringing your foot back, and then just going through all kind of the ranges of motion that the ankle can do.
So Jasmine, I don't mean to interrupt. Just with that part about warming up your ankle and kind of moving it in different directions, rolling it in and out, etc. I've heard, is it a myth that doing that too much increases your joint laxity? So increases the mobility in the joint and stretches the ligaments and then makes you more prone to spraining your ankle? Is that correct, or is that a myth?
It's quite possible. And some people you can. I think it's a bit of a cop-out, but I say it depends a lot because everybody is so different. But I find this is why stretching and mobility exercises have to be coupled with any strengthening exercises as well. So that's why when I say that you have to do all your mobility work before you get on the court, but then you also need to make sure that you go home, do your homework to make sure that you strengthen the ankle to prevent it as well afterwards is really, really important. So in saying that, with ankle sprains and whatnot, my favorite ankle exercises as a whole as anything to do with balance work. And then I like to progress the balance work with distraction balance work. So what that means is that, for example, I'll get my client in front of me standing on one foot, and then they could be wobbling a little bit, but they're not too bad if they're fairly stable. And then I'll give them a ball, just like your standard little rubber lacrosse ball or something, and I'll get them to throw it to themselves. And you'll find almost immediately their balance is lost. And the reason is because when you're standing still and you're just balancing on the same spot, you're going to focus your eyes on one spot on the wall, for example. And what that does is it helps concentrate your balance a lot more. But when I add the ball, you find that you're now trying to throw this ball and also stay on one foot. So it becomes a bit of a circus act. But I say to my patients, when you're walking down the street, do you think about the way that you're walking? Do you think about how you're placing your foot on the concrete every single step? No. So how am I going to train you to have the muscle strength and the muscle memory to be able to catch itself before it actually gets there? So that's why I add this distraction exercises. So then we can train when you're even in badminton, if your ankle is going to roll itself or it could go to that point, it's able to spring with its muscle memory back before you even have to consciously think of it to bring it back yourself.
Yeah, completely agree. I've done my ankle many times, and there's so much what we call proprioception work, which is basically the balance work where you're on one leg, you're closing your eyes, you're getting things thrown at you and trying to balance. And then there's all the wobble boards and the dura discs and all those unfamiliar surfaces that you're not used to, just to try to train that muscle memory into the muscles and ligaments so it's going to catch you. So I think that's really important. And I think it's something that people neglect a lot because they say, I've sprained my ankle, it's a bit sore, I'm just going to rest it and do nothing. And then when it gets better, then I'm not going to actually do anything about it. It's better now, so I don't need to do anything. But there's a lot of training and rehabilitation to do after.
Yeah. And that's why it's important when you do roll your ankle to begin with, or you know that you've strained it a little bit, you need to be able to look after it well. So that means your RICE, so your rest, ice, compression, and elevation, and looking after it in that way. And then ensuring that you do the mobility work and the strength work coupled with that, like a little bit afterwards, to make sure that you don't lose that strength through that ligament, especially after you've strained it a little bit. And then,
And just to reiterate for those playing at home, that if you are trying to prevent, one of these injuries, just like Jasmine said, that there are a couple of elements to consider. It's not just mobility, it's not just strengthening, it is both that you need to look into to prevent these types of injuries. And for say that now I, like many people, have injured my ankle. What am I doing? There is the RICE that you just mentioned, but is there anything else immediately after injury?
Right after injury, what would be best is to, after all the RICE, sorry, I'm getting very flustered for some reason.
That's all right.
It's okay. After you've eaten some rice, then
eat some rice first. And
okay,
then
first things first.
Wash the rice.
Eat some rice.
Boil it.
Yeah.
I would recommend that you do give it that compression. So if you've got a compression bandage or an ankle brace of sorts, just to help hold it and give it support in the first few days to week or two, depending on how badly you sprained it, is really important, just so then it doesn't go a little bit too relaxed as well. But as I said, you have to couple it with that mobility and the strength work afterwards. If it is still persistent after the initial acute phase, so the first 2 to 3 weeks, I really recommend that you go see somebody in the allied health field, so your physio, your podiatrist and whatnot, so we can actually give you an assessment, check how bad it is, and whether or not we can do anything more to it to be able to help you or give you more guided treatment as well. Because sometimes this is all very generalized stuff, but sometimes there is more things that we need to consider.
Okay, so here's a question for you. I've done my ankle. Who am I going to choose, the physio or a podiatrist?
This is the thing. With a lot of allied health, we all branch into each other anyway. So
Sure.
I find that with physios, they do work more closely with the acute patients. So I don't actually see a lot of acute patients. So with all of this acute sprains of ankles and whatnot, I don't seem to tend to see them. I get all your chronic ones. I get people who come in after 6 months and they haven't looked after it. And then now I'm trying to make sure that their strength comes back up. So I find that generally, in a sense, you tend to go and see the physio first. And then if nothing happens, you see the podiatrist. But, at the end of the day, it just depends on your practitioner. Everybody's different. And podiatrists in general, although we do see more chronic pain rather than your acute pain compared to the physios, we still are trained in it. So we still see that very commonly. It's just not as commonly as much as I would say the physios would.
Sure. And Jasmine, I know we've gone through it briefly about the RICE acronym, but I think because it's applicable to all injuries, not just ankle sprains, do you mind just running through the actual protocols for the RICE?
Yeah. So the RICE, rest, which is explanatory in itself. So take some time off,
Stop playing.
Stop playing.
Get off the court.
Get off the court.
Know where your limits are, basically. Ice, so that's putting cold pack on it. So your ice pack on it. So a lot of the times with ankle sprains, you do get a lot of swelling. So it just helps reduce the swelling and the inflammation to the area. Compression just helps bring all of that swelling back up to the heart. So it just helps with the regularity of the blood flow as well as helping support the injured site. And then elevation, just keeping your feet up and also helping with all of that blood flow as well.
So in terms of the icing, I've heard a lot of different things, and I know it's changed a lot over the time with technology and research and everything like that. So I've heard of people saying you should ice 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off. It should never be direct on the skin. There should be at least a towel between because it doesn't need to be that cold. What's your protocol on the icing part of it?
I don't like ice packs right on the skin. So if you can have like even just a paper towel in between, that would be good. But just to have it for as about like your 10 minutes and then off for a couple of minutes and then on again. It's generally about 20 minutes is more than enough. Sometimes you can go to 30 minutes, but sometimes that's a bit excessive as well. It depends on the person, how they feel with it. And 10 minutes twice, it's generally fine in that moment after you've injured, and then go home and then do it again.
So in terms of, let's say 24 hours after the acute injury, you're talking this particular protocol on a morning and night basis, or is there a different a frequency going forward?
Going forward, the heat and the ice argument is quite hotly debated all the time. So what I normally say is it's always about balance, because we're trying to balance the inflammation in the area. You don't want too much and you don't want too little, because inflammation brings blood flow and blood flow brings healing properties. So you want to be able to have enough inflammation in the area so that you can get those healing. But you don't want too much that it's overheating the area too. So what I would generally say with an acute injury is that if you've done a long day at work or you've had a long day in general and you've been on your feet, you would put the ice pack on to help cool it down. But then in the morning when you're stiff and you're uncomfortable, then you would introduce your heat. So that's when you would have your heat packs and so on and so forth to help with just that re-inflammation, get your mobility up. And that's when you can actually do your mobility exercises just to help mobilize through that stiffness. And then that's when you can go off on your way. Does that make sense?
Sure. Absolutely. I think we've covered the ankle really well at this stage. So Jasmine, why don't we move on to the Achilles/heel area that commonly gets injured in badminton? What are some things to do to prevent that? And how can I manage it if it's really sore after I play?
So the main things to do in terms of prevention is everything to do with exercise. So it will be your stretching, so making sure that your calves are stretched, and then also your strengthening, so doing your calf raises. I really like doing isometric calf raises, which is doing it on a 3x3x3 basis. And what that means is I like doing them off a declined step. And what I would get my patients to do is slowly go up on a 3-second rule up to the top on their tippy toes, and then hold that for 3 seconds, and then taking another 3 seconds to go back down to a declined position. So their ankle is actually in a pulled up position. I'm trying to describe it.
So it's kind of stretching your calf muscle because it's declined.
Yes, that's right. And so, we do that in the 3x3x3. And I normally get people to start off with about a five reps, 3 sets, depending on how they feel. And then as they get more comfortable with it, you can always add more reps, or you can always add more weight. The other things to think about when you're trying to prevent Achilles or heel pain is footwear is so incredibly important. A lot of our shoes in badminton I've found are quite flat. So we have something in the footwear technology industry that they call a heel height difference. And that is the gradient between the height of the heel to the height of the forefoot, so where your toes sit. And in most running shoes, we've got about an 8 to 12 millimeter difference. In badminton shoes, because a lot of badminton players like to have their feet feeling like they feel the court, and then they feel like they can spring a lot better by having that more flatness to the shoe. Some people may find that stresses their Achilles a lot more, just purely because they're not used to it. Because in every other shoe that we're in day to day, you've got a centimeter off the ground that your heel doesn't have to reach as hard. So your Achilles is getting worked an extra centimeter higher. Does that make sense?
That completely makes sense. My understanding for the reason why the badminton shoes are a lot flatter, so basically from the heel to toe, basically decline, if you want to call it that, is that if the heel is higher, then you're more likely to sprain your ankle. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Because you are in this position where you are able to move your ankle a lot more freely as well.
So just to segue while we're talking about badminton shoes, so if I were to consider the current state of badminton shoes, how would I decide on a badminton shoe? And what would you recommend when, say, for example, I'm looking for a badminton shoe and I want to do what's best for my feet? What are some of the key recommendations that you would give to that badminton player or myself?
So the main key features in the shoe that you would look for are a few things. So you would really want a stable heel counter, so then it helps hold in your heel. You also want to make sure that the strength of the shoe torsionally, or what I would say, you would try to wring out the shoe. If you're trying to wring out a face towel, you shouldn't be able to move it quite a lot from that side to side and through the midfoot of the shoe. So where your foot sits in the shoe, it shouldn't bend. The only part in the shoe that should bend quite easily is where the toes are, so then you can spring off when you're moving. But other than that, you shouldn't be moving. The fit of the shoe is also quite important. A lot of people find that, my foot is really wide, I'm just going to go an extra size up. There are a lot of options in terms of width sizes in general with shoes in general. You should be able to find something that gives you a bit more width. Otherwise, there are lacing techniques that do help you give more room in the shoe. So for example, for myself, I do have a bit of a wider forefoot. So what I do is I skip the front hole of the shoe. So it helps just let my toes move a little bit more easily, because otherwise when the shoe is laced up completely, for me, it's just a bit too constricting at my toes. And I find that it does give me a bit of pain through my forefoot. So those are the main things. Also in terms of the actual sizing, you should be only looking for a 0.5 centimeter to 1 centimeter from the end of your longest toe to the end of the shoe. Your longest toe may not be your big toe, so just be wary of that.
Sure. And so let's just say I'm picking up a shoe from the shelf and I'm testing those three things, which was heel counter, there was the torsional strength, and also where the shoe bends, which should be only at basically where the toes join to the foot part of it. How do I, other than wringing it out like a towel, how do I test like the heel counter? Like how do I actually test that?
So an easy way to test it is if you just push your thumb at the very back of the shoe where the heel is, and just try to see whether you can push it in. If you can push it in really, really easily, then, and if it kind of just caves in, then it's not the best choice in terms of the heel counter itself. But it should be able to give a little bit, but not to the point that you can basically press it in.
I just realized that my casual shoes don't have very good heel counter. Thank you for that, Jasmine.
Not many of them do.
Not many of them do, definitely.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So we'll just focus on, I guess, straining the Achilles rather than an actual Achilles tear, shall we?
Yes, because that's Achilles tears.
It's
horrible.
Yeah. I've certainly seen it on court. So it's just painful just to think about. But in terms of managing, so let's say I have just sprained my Achilles. Is it the similar sort of recovery processes you described for the ankle as well?
So in the acute phases, it is quite similar. So in terms of resting, making sure that it is well supported to begin with, making sure that you're in good footwear all the time after the strain is really important, because a lot of the time you'll go off with your thongs off court. So we want to make sure that you're still well supported all throughout the next week. And a lot of the times as well, even at home, because if you're walking at home barefoot, then, that can give you enough time to also strain it again, or just not allow it to heal very easily. So we need to help support it in a way that it can allow it to heal. Other things that you can do is just to make sure that you can tape it. So if you're not able to be in shoes all the time, for example, tape it up so then it is in a comfortable position to support the area. Making sure that you are stretching your calves, because especially with how explosive of a sport badminton is, our calves are always generally quite tight. So you'll find that a lot of badminton players are just constantly just so tight through their calves, and we need to help stretch them and release them. And that's why a lot of the times they can get that heel pain, that Achilles pain as well.
Yeah, sure. So Jasmine, moving on to say the knee now, because I know that knee issues are a big problem in badminton as well.
Yeah.
What's the most common cause of that, and how would we prevent it?
So the most common causes of knee injuries I find is due to jumping and landing in badminton. So from what happens is if you've jumped up and you've landed, and if you haven't landed with a soft knee, then sometimes that jarring through from the feet up to your knee can be a lot, as well as if you're coming in and lunging for a shot, for example, and then if your foot posture isn't in the right position, or you've twisted it in the wrong position, it can also cause the knee to fall in a certain way. So your knee can fall inwards a lot, which I see in people who have flat feet. And that can also give you that overuse area of just the inside portion of the knee as well. In terms of prevention, this is where the footwear comes in, but also in terms of your foot posture. So how can we help put it in a more optimal position? So this may mean orthotics, and this may mean that we need to help tape it in a certain way before you go onto court, and also maybe even just helping strap up your knee in particular, because it could just be your knee itself needing more stability.
Yeah, and for me personally, I've had orthotics literally since I remember starting to play badminton, actually, because I had ankle problems initially and a bit of knee problem as well. Now, for people out there, what are orthotics and how do they differ from you know how you can buy them from the chemist or the pharmacy where there's just the generic insoles I can put in my shoes. What's the difference between what you do and those generic ones?
So the differences between the customized orthotics and the off-the-shelf, either the chemist orthotics, purely is that we can customize them. So what I do in my practice is that I make sure that we assess you fully. And a lot of the times, if you do have feet that differ from one another, so one foot may roll in more than the other foot, we don't want to be correcting both feet to the one that rolls in more. That's what I find the mistake comes in with a lot of people who self-diagnose themselves. They'll get a pair of orthotics for themselves for their flat feet, and then they find that one of their feet is now hurting, one of their feet are now hurting on the outside of that foot. So that's just what we call overcorrection. And we actually much prefer for your foot to roll in than for it to roll outward, because rolling in is actually a natural shock absorption ability of our body. But rolling outwards is going to cause you to sprain your ankle and all of the other works as well. Your body just doesn't rebound back from rolling outward as easily as rolling inward.
Yeah, sure. I think that makes a lot more sense now. And I completely agree that both sides of the body aren't the same. So you can't really get a stock standard. You can, but might not be optimal to get a stock standard orthotic or insole that's going to correct your feet in the same way when they don't actually need it. Now, I've got one more question for you, Jasmine, and it might open up a can of worms here, but we're not going to talk about it for too long. But it's the notion of barefoot running. And basically, because I know that there's a movement, I don't know if you call it a movement, but a belief that, hey, look, the reason that all of our foot problems or our injuries is because all of a sudden we are standing on concrete all the time. There's no there's no outside unevenness that we often step on. And for that reason, our feet have lost the ability to adapt to different surfaces, etc. And now there's a lot of people wearing these barefoot slippers or shoes or whatever you want to call them and saying, hey, look, it's better for your feet if you train your muscles back to the old days when we were cavemen running around after our prey and running away from the saber-toothed tiger. So what's your take on the barefoot running business?
I completely agree with what you just said. I do believe in the whole, our bodies are very adaptable. We are able to do all these things that our ancestors used to do in terms of chasing after our food and running away from saber-toothed tigers. But it's unfortunately because of how we've developed now as a species, we're not as able to walk on concrete and whatnot because we're a little bit more sensitive now. So I find it's very much dependent on the person. If I can train a young kid to run outside barefoot and make sure that they're walking barefoot at home, that is amazing. And that's what I generally tell to most parents. Let your kid walk barefoot at home. If they can run outside in the backyard and, have their feet in grass and whatnot, permitted that it's safe, do it. Because I think that it just develops our muscles so much more better than if we're constantly in these molds of our shoes all the time. I find though, if you're an older adult, your feet have a few problems and whatnot, it is not something that you should go into straight away. It is something that you could possibly do. You just need to train yourself up to it. So it just depends on whether or not you're able to give yourself that time to be able to adapt to the surfaces and also be able to move from going from a shoe that is very pitched, like I was talking before, to a flat surface, your foot flat on the floor, and also on top of that, without the massive bulk of cushioning that we have under our feet, which we get from our shoes. And that's why with a lot of runners and such as well, essentially, I do recommend having two pairs of shoes, and that are two pairs of shoes that are very different from one another in the sense of what sort of cushioning do they use in the shoe and what sort of structure do they use in the shoe. because then your feet are always adapting. It learns to be different. It learns to be changing all the time. Whereas if you're constantly used to something, if you're suddenly put in an environment that you're not used to, your feet are not going to be able to cope with that change very well.
That's really fascinating. It's like developing resilience and adaptability for your feet. I mean, lately there's been a lot of talk about resilience and adaptability in people in their careers and things like that. But then it's sort of, now that we're talking to you and talking about feet, it's like we're putting that spin on feet as well. I think that's really cool. So we've come to the end of the podcast. And before we finish up, I just want to firstly, thank you again for coming onto the podcast, Jasmine.
No, thanks for having me.
And you know what I thought was really interesting about this podcast, and certainly I must say that I was probably fairly ignorant and one of those people that would go, oh, there's nothing wrong with my feet, I'm not going to go see a podiatrist, even though I come from a scientific background. So it's really good to be able to, I guess, dispel some of the myths around podiatry and really open up my mind to podiatry as something to consider if there's other parts of my body that aren't functioning optimally. So thank you for that. And Jeff, is there anything that...
Yeah, I like the fact that you've talked about kids growing up and developing barefoot. Of course, if they have injuries and pain in their joints and knees, of course, that's something we need to consult a professional with. But the idea of walking barefoot around the house and around the backyard, provided it's safe and it's soft on the grass and there's nothing sinister there, I think that's a really good lesson to be learned. And yeah, that was really interesting for me.
And so, Jasmine, if there's someone out there listening to this podcast who just wants to have a hit with you, or even if they're wanting some advice or wanting to see you for a consultation regarding their feet, how would they connect with you for advice besides looking for your Instagram handle and finding those disgusting foot photos that are like Dr. Pimple Popper?
You can email me at jasmine@tworightfeet.com.au. I'm very open to questions. So, even if you're unsure as to whether or not a podiatrist is the right fit for you or whether or not podiatry can help you, feel free to just shoot me a message. I can help guide you on your way. If I can say, oh yeah, that's definitely something I can help with, or podiatrist can help with, or not, then I can at least help you find the right person to go and see. Otherwise, you can find me at my socials at 2 Right Feet Podiatry, and you can always message me there as well.
Sure. So 2 Right Feet is the number 2.
Yeah.
Right, as in right, not left. Feet, podiatry.
Yeah, that's right.
Just all without spaces, of course, because it's a handle.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll also put it in the podcast description as well.
Yep, great. So Jasmine, thanks again for being on the Badminton podcast. I think the listeners would have gotten a lot of value just because it's a topic that I think not many people know about. I've definitely learned a lot of things on it. And hopefully I don't really want to be seeing too many people running around the badminton court barefoot. That might be a bit dangerous. Maybe not enough padding for the jumping and the leaping around. So maybe that's not a good idea. Do you agree?
I think in terms of the actual sliding and whatnot, it might be a bit sore on your feet and you might end up with a few blisters.
Yeah.
But for everyone listening, thanks so much for tuning in, because we're really excited that we're having this podcast with Jasmine. And we're hoping to get some more people on in the allied health field, that we're not going to just talk about badminton. As you know, we're going to talk about things related to badminton that's going to help your badminton game as well as your lives as well, because no one likes living with injuries.
And so that you can keep playing your badminton, make sure that you do check up on yourself every now and again. It's really important to make sure that you're still functioning optimally so you can continue to play the sport that we are so addicted to, apparently, because of the salt and vinegar chips and the McDonald's sessions afterwards. Make sure that you do keep sharing your love of the sport with everyone. Do not disconnect once you've left the stadium. It's important that you do show the world how incredible badminton is, because it is such a fantastic sport. Is that right, Jasmine?
Yes, definitely.
And if you want to connect with us, you can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok. And on our website.
We've got TikTok now.
Yeah, we've got TikTok now. At our social media handle, Volantwear, VOLANTWEAR, or the Badminton Podcast, THEBADMINTON. It's podcast. It's really hard for me to spell.
Podcast, no spaces.
Yep, there you go. And our website, www.volantwear.com.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You have to say bye.
Yeah, you have to say bye. Really.
Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by Volantwear, the most versatile badminton apparel you'll ever own.